It's the World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Happy to be here, as always.
Happy to have you back in Paris. Also joining us, Leila Jacinto, who's made the trip from the second floor internet desk newsroom at France24.com. How are you?
Good to be here.
Good to have you. Agnès Poirier, London correspondent for the French news weekly magazine Marianne, who shuttles on the Eurostar.
I do.
Thank you for being with us as well. And we have with us as well correspondent at large for Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz, Dov Alfon. Nice to see you. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, # World This Week. After a bruising 48 hours, the UK Prime Minister soldiering on, quote, at her most robotically indefatigable, as one hostile Daily Telegraph columnist put it. Theresa May up bright and early, fielding calls from listeners on morning radio after the resignation of 4 cabinet members over the draft Brexit plan that was unveiled. She's filled those posts. She's fending off for now that call for an open revolt from hard Brexit conservative backbenchers.
I think a coup is when you use illegitimate procedures to try and overturn somebody who is in office. This is working through the procedures of the Conservative Party. It is therefore entirely constitutional, and dare I say to Newsnight, coup is the wrong word.
So is that not a coup going to work or not, Agnès Poirier?
Well, I think you should have invited some psychiatrists and psychoanalysts because I've been covering this from the beginning, and it's a national psychosis. It runs on a parallel universe. There's something profoundly neurotic about it. So I'm not sure we should talk about politics here, but we'll have to. So
that's how it was described 2 years ago, right? That it was this public schoolboy argument between people who'd gone to these elite private schools that had spilled over into a referendum. That's how some people described it.
Well, I would recommend reading the Financial Times tomorrow on Saturday, because there's a damning piece about that elite, in their late 40s, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, who are just playing with the destiny of a great nation, or used to be a great nation.
But of course, it's dividing. it's dividing families, though, up and down, and not just in the elites.
No, completely. I mean, it's in a way, it's their Dreyfus affair. I mean, there's a generation complete divide. If you look at the figures, all the British under 40 are, and the younger they get, the more pro-European they are. And from the age of 40, 45, and the older they get, they are more Eurosceptic. And I know a lot of British families, they are completely divided. They've stopped talking to each other. So that's why I'm talking about psychoanalysis or even psychiatry. Because now if you look at politics, all the different scenarios. I mean, I could talk to you and in 30 minutes, there will be events that will completely invalidate what I'm going to tell you. But there are so many different possible scenarios for the next few hours, the next few days, the next few weeks, until next week, the European Council in Brussels, and indeed, for the next few months.
All right, Theresa May, finding friends in unlikely places. Ever since UK tabloid The Daily Mail changed its editor-in-chief, well, suddenly it's no longer baying for her blood. There's the front page headline, "Have they lost the plot?" On the front page editorial, it says, "Contrast the calmness and composure of Mrs. May with the shrill baying of the peacocking saboteurs." And by the way, the cabinet's most prominent Brexiters, Michael Gove, Liam Fox, they've decided to stay put for now.
Do you have confidence in the Prime Minister, Mr. Gove?
I absolutely do. And I'm also looking forward to continuing to work with all my government colleagues and all my colleagues in Parliament in order to make sure that we get the best future for Britain. I think it's absolutely vital that we focus on getting the right deal in the future and making sure that in the areas that matter so much to the British people, we can get a good outcome.
Christopher Dickey.
How can you take those people seriously? I mean, they are serious. They're in the government. He's staying in the government. He's got some game he's playing with Theresa May. He thinks that he'll be able to influence things. But he's essentially a hard Brexiteer. And I agree with Agnes completely. The situation is so bizarre. They are cutting a deal now where basically they are going to have all the responsibilities and many of the costs of belonging to Europe, but no voice in Europe whatsoever. That has always been the problem. And I get, frankly, I mean, you know from previous shows, I get so confused by this, as I think many people in Great Britain get confused by it, that I just sort of back away. I'd rather talk about, Palestinian politics or something.
We will.
We have
Dov Halfon.
Well, first of all, I'd like to really give Mrs. May a prize for political endurance. Let's call it the Shimon Peres prize, I don't know, right? And because she was supposed to be dead by now, right? Politically. She won't, in a week we'll forget all about her. She'll never get this deal done. She'll never pass it through government, etc. And here she is. And I think it's remarkable. And I think that really Shimon Peres probably from above takes some notes. And I think also that all her opposition from inside, they do not recommend what to do because they have absolutely
It's a game of
plan.
chicken.
Yes, it's really, okay, let's see now with James Dean and let's see who wants till the end. And I think that from here she can very calmly say there is no other plan. It's either no deal or my deal. And this is all her strength.
Or no
she plays
Brexit.
it
Or no
Or no
Brexit.
Brexit.
Which she hinted at because the parliament...
She did.
Yes.
She did.
There will
She
be a
did.
Look,
parliamentary
they should
vote.
just take another referendum. I mean, it was stupid to have one referendum. Maybe it's doubly stupid to have two.
Well, it depends how you formulate the question. I
Well,
mean,
yes.
everything is in... Yeah.
Another referendum or another election, because that's another possibility.
This is true. I mean,
both.
the one thing about the political games, I mean, what is incredible is Theresa May's job is not desirable. You remember David Cameron whistling as he said, he's quitting this job. So who even wants this job? Who wants to be responsible for the messy Brexit that comes out of it? And if there is another election, I think, when I was watching the parliamentary session and the circus and the neurosis, as you say, very, no stiff upper lip, and you sort of contrast it with, the technocrats in Brussels that, the UK press has always been castigating. This was absolutely a contrast of technocrats who do the job and understand extremely tricky things and this political circus, because I mean, they really are just performing. There is no alternative to this. And and I started thinking, this term technocrat, it got a really bad vibe at some point. But if you just look at the verb, it means a skilled technician. And it was a leftist concept during the Roosevelt era. And now, people are voting on something that they do not understand. I mean, the number of journalists, British journalists, who cannot quite explain backstop. So, so such complex things, we're going to put it to the voters again.
No, you put to the voters again. Do you want to go leave the European Union and then we'll go back to the deal we're talking about, or you want to just stay in the Union?
And in the name of balance, I should say that the same infighting and neurosis and psychosis taking place in the Conservatives is also taking place within the Labour Party. On Wednesday in the Commons, Theresa May, responding in kind when the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, highlighted the differences between the PM and the man who was still then her Brexit secretary.
But he wants to talk about different positions that are being taken. What we're doing is delivering a good deal that would deliver on the vote of the British people. We're delivering Brexit. What have we seen recently from the Labour Party? Well, the Labour leader said we can't stop Brexit. The shadow Brexit secretary said we can stop it. So when he stands up, he should make it clear. Is it Labour Party policy to stop Brexit?
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, Labour respects the result of the referendum. But what we don't respect is the shambolic mess that this government has made of negotiations.
Great rhetoric, but he doesn't really answer her point, does he?
Well, he's a Brexiteer. You know, he wants Brexit. He's not going to stop it. The problem is, the majority of British Labour MPs are pro-European. So how do you square the circle? To go back on what's might happen, as you're saying, a new PM is not going to change anything. That's why I think Theresa May is going to stay, even if there might be a vote of no confidence, if they get enough letters. And she's shown resilience. And she wants to deliver what the referendum agreed on, Brexit, even though it was based on lies. Therefore, there are people asking for a second referendum. And perhaps a new election would change things, but perhaps not, because of the contradictions and the civil war, really, of the Labour Party. So whichever way you look at Brexit, it's a headache for everyone.
All right, the man sitting next to you is sometimes on this panel complained that he's a little bit bored by the whole Brexit saga.
I think I'm
Chris
doing a very
Radicki, this
good-
week you weren't bored. Tell me you weren't
I'm
bored.
doing a very
you
good
can't
job
be bored
trying
this,
to stay awake.
You
at the
can't
moment.
be bored this week. There's no way.
No. The debate, come on, the debate was great fun. I mean, the segment you just showed, it was great. I couldn't turn it off. I was absolutely riveted. If you ask me what was said, I can't remember a goddamn thing, but I loved watching the show.
All right. We don't know whether there'll be an early election in Britain. There's probably a better chance of there being an early election in Israel. Now, it's the Sabbath there. That means we won't know if the cabinet will fall, at least not until the Sabbath is over. Sources within the ruling coalition predict early elections after the resignation of far-right Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who'd accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of capitulating to terror earlier in the week when the coalition government agreed to an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire with Gaza. This after the worst cross-border fighting since 2014 was triggered by a botched raid by Israeli commandos into that Palestinian territory. What happens after Saturday night?
The famous saying by Henry Kissinger, Israel is the only country in the world who has absolutely no foreign policy. It has only domestic policy influencing its foreign policy. And so a bizarre game of coalition suddenly blew up to a major crisis with Egypt, with Gaza, with the United States, and everybody's just asking, okay, that's okay, but what's going on with the Israeli government? And nobody knows. Netanyahu is a key player, a veteran of coalition deals, of sudden surprise decisions. He has a coalition of 61 from 120. All he has to do is to convince 2 or 3 MPs from the Labour Party or from any other small party to join the effort to stay away from Gaza, to stop a possible war, and he might very well succeed in that.
All right, so but what would that do? Because right now it's the most right-wing government Israel has ever had. What lies ahead?
Well, it's funny because he wanted this government. He had an alternative of going with Yitzhak Herzog and the Labour Party. He preferred to go to a right-wing government, the most right-wing Israel have ever said. And this is just because he wanted a stable coalition, and here he goes now, probably getting calls and calling MPs he never talked with them, and it's really a big humiliation, but he can survive that.
He can survive it, but what triggered it all? Because we had this botched raid into Gaza where there were an Israeli commando killed, another critically injured, there were 7 Palestinians killed.
Yes.
Why was that done just days after they had seemed like there was a thaw in the works?
First of all, it's probable that this kind of operation go on every night or every week. It's not. It's very regular duty for an occupying army to enter a frontier and check what's going on the other side. I think that Netanyahu didn't know that this is what's going to happen. It's probable that Avigdor Lieberman knew perfectly well that the operation is under when his prime minister is in Paris talking about the end of wars. And this is the game, this is exactly the Kissinger saying, it's only domestic policy. There is absolutely not one thought about the millions of Palestinians or about the peace. It's all about who has the power.
Christopher Dickey?
No, absolutely. I think that's a very good analysis. I mean, it really is hugely ironic that Avigdor Lieberman presumably approves this raid that gets completely screwed up, starts fighting that basically neither side wanted. Hamas didn't want to engage in this, and certainly Netanyahu did not. The peace, the truce suits them all very well. Maintaining a certain kind of tense status quo suits those parties very well. So Lieberman approves the IDF sending in its special operations forces, and they blow it. They totally blow it. And then when finally Netanyahu calms things down and Hamas calms things down, Lieberman says, oh, you're giving in to Hamas and I'm going to resign because you screwed up. I mean, it's not incredible, it's perfectly predictable, but it is ironic, and I think a lot of people see through it. And then you haven't even mentioned Bennett, Naftali Bennett, who comes in and says, now I've got to be defense minister. And the only answer that Netanyahu has is says, no, I'm going to be defense minister and foreign minister and prime minister. I'm going to have every ministry in the cabinet.
Can I borrow Agnès Poirier's words about the neurosis and the national psychosis going on? Because this is exactly the same thing. And truly, Naftali Bennett again is trying to influence and maybe to blackmail the prime minister. And Netanyahu had a lot of blackmailers in his coalitions past away. I'm not sure he has the political talent to pull this through, but we'll know very soon.
Like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like as early as tomorrow. Lila Jacinto.
What's the question?
The question is, at this point, which way is it going to go in Israel when you hear the way it's described by Dov as this game of chess between Likud and the far right?
Right. I mean, the thing is, even if he does manage to, astute player as he is, and he's coming close to being the longest-serving Israeli prime minister, and that's what he'd like, Netanyahu. But, even if he does manage to get 2 or 3 seats here, that's not going to be very stable at all. The election is set for November 20... in a year from now, November 2019. I'm not sure that we're not looking into early elections, but I really don't think that this is ever going to swing towards Labour, because the mood of the country seems to be so right. Politicians falling all over each other to blast a truce deal. So in terms of the Palestinians, that really is not going to change, and I think we probably would have early elections in Israel, but not really any dynamic change in the Middle East conflict.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at that Twitter storm from the other side of the Atlantic that was directed at France's president. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Lila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com. Agnès Poirier, London correspondent for French news weekly magazine Marianne. And also with us, by the way, Agnès, should give a mention to your book, right?
If you'd like.
Left Bank, Art, Passion, and the Rebirth of Paris after the war. Also with us as well, Dov Alfon, editor-at-large for Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz. It was the week where Saudi and Emirati-backed forces halted their offensive in Yemen on the port city of Hodeidah, and under pressure from Western powers agreed to go on to peace talks. The pressure from the U.S. coming for other reasons as well. The U.S. slapping sanctions on 17 Saudis, including Saud al-Qahtani. That's the Crown Prince's former top advisor. That move coming as over in Istanbul, and you can see the images there. They held funeral prayers this Friday for Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist murdered when he walked into his consulate there last month. The Saudis still aren't saying where the body is, but they have rounded up 21 suspects of their own investigation, 5 of whom eventually face the death penalty.
This case is being dealt with by the judiciary system of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we refuse any attempt to politicize it or to interfere in the kingdom's internal affairs.
Where to start, Lila Jacinto? First of all, this Saudi, the rounding up of 21 people, there have been charges filed against 11 of them. What do you make of that?
And 5 on the death penalty, which is on charges of what? Following orders. You know, if you put people on the death penalty, then you have 5 less witnesses. I mean, by all accounts, there has to be an international investigation into this, you know, an international trial, which, of course, the Saudis are not going to allow. But it's more than a month now since Khashoggi's death, and you know this. The positive thing about it is that there has been a lull in the fighting in Hodeidah, and there is no doubt that this is the pressure coming from the U.S. On Saudi Arabia. But there's you know, there's also this, you know, the Trump administration welcoming this statement. I mean, how many different scenarios have the Saudis provided us on this?
Yeah, there's mixed messages coming out of Washington, because on the one hand, there are those sanctions under the Magnitsky Act.
Yeah, but sanctions against the people who are already under arrest, except for a couple like Khatani. Yeah. And, you know, Leila's exactly right. In Saudi, it really is sick, right? Everybody believes, with good reason, that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, ordered this premeditated murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And they believe it for all kinds of reasons, because you don't take forensic scientists to interview somebody and persuade them to come home.
Bone saw.
You don't take a bone saw. You don't take any of these things to interview somebody and bring them home. It's always been a preposterous conceit that this was not ordered by Mohammed bin Salman himself, because he controls every damn thing in the kingdom, and that's the way he wants it, except now. Now everybody is maneuvering to try and protect him in Saudi Arabia, in the government in Saudi Arabia, and in the Trump administration. These sanctions by the Trump administration are another part of the cover-up to say, we accept that it's everybody but Mohammed bin Salman. That's really what we're looking at, is this desperate effort to exculpate a man who probably was the intellectual author of a really savage murder. And why is that? Well, look at the relationship between the Trump regime and the Saudi regime. The very first place that Trump visited abroad wasn't Canada, wasn't Mexico, wasn't Europe. It was Saudi Arabia. And why is that? That's why. Money. It's as simple as that.
And the thing is, you know, this has so many consequences, because I don't know if you saw the NBC report. Apparently, you know, so Saudi Arabia has its interests. And of course, Turkey and Erdogan is critical in this. Erdogan has been keeping up the pressure, you know, providing the investigative information drip by drip. You know, the famous audio tapes, you know, has not come out publicly. None of the heads of state have heard this. And apparently the Trump administration went back to the Justice Department and the Homeland Security Department to ask both of them to re-look into the extradition of Turkish cleric Fethullah Gulen.
To try and keep Turkey quiet.
Right. So, I mean, from the point of view of the media, there's so much to monitor.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to say that now, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said, but the mask...
I'd love to hear that.
But the mask is off. I mean, it's not as if public opinion was going to be fooled. So we had... No, but remember, 18 months ago, we have this young crown prince coming, touring the world.
The great reformer.
The great reformer. We could have been led to, you know, to think that perhaps there was some truth in it. And now it appears for what it is, very unstable. And, you know, it's not as if...
You can't put that back in a box.
No, you can't. And even if, you know, those 5 people who might actually be raised, and as you say, witnesses gone that way, and
One of
Crown
them's
Prince
already
being...
dead, yeah.
And the Crown Prince being, you know, spared. But... So, we know the truth, don't we? Of course, Erdogan is actually playing his cards, of course. But we also know this. So it's not as if, you know, things are changed now, in the sense that we know what he stands for.
Well, I think the one element in this that I would like to know, and I don't know how I would know it, is essentially why the Turks could know so much about the killing and didn't know about any of its antecedents, didn't know it was going to happen. They clearly had the consulate wired. Mm-hmm. There clearly were conversations in the consulate laying the groundwork for the killing. It seems to me perfectly plausible within that context that the Turks could have known that Khashoggi was going in to be killed and did nothing.
I'd like to offer an alternative to this somber scenario. This is the second time, actually, that a country that's being looked down by the West has a technology that suddenly, an intelligence trove that suddenly surprised everyone. We had Dubai when a Mossad action went bad,
yes,
and now
Mossad
we have suddenly
surprised.
Turkey with this all Israeli technology, by the way, with this state-of-the-art listening. But what could have happened is that they systematically record everything. And then they only go backward on the drive when something happened at this date. And this is why they could suddenly say, this guy arrived, this is the content of his suitcase. If you'll go into Turkey, in 1 week, nobody will check what was in your suitcase. But if they want
I
to check...
take your point, Dov. I think that's a very smart observation. But I'm talking about the actual recording of conversations inside
they could
the
record
consulate.
everything in
Well,
all foreign consulates.
If you see the timeline, it was really quick because on the same day that Jamal and his fiancée went into the marriage bureau and were told that he needed this document, that very day, it was a Friday, he went straight to the consulate. And they told him to come back on Monday. So obviously there were, a trigger was set, but it was fairly quick. Friday was the last time he walked into so there was a weekend before he came in again. So, maybe the Turkish intelligence weren't paying attention if these devices...
Right,
but,
I just am raising the question, and it's not a question that I've seen raised a lot, but I think it's a legitimate.
But I mean...
And we'll know more as the...
Right, but Agnes did make a point about, what now inside the House of Saud, because he has made a lot of enemies within the family. So I guess everybody is now going to be watching, will there be another branch coming up, or is he really as strong within the family?
And we'll have to see about that. The week began with Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump insisting that the hatchet had been buried after a pugnacious tweet from the U.S. president when he landed for Armistice Day commemorations in Paris, blasting his French counterpart's idea of a European army. They both attended the ceremonies here. Then Trump went home. Wow. Tuesday morning, a series of missives indicating that the bromance is well and truly over. Trump, who said that they were starting to learn German in Paris before the U.S. came along, even playing on a variation, of his greatest hits with the slogan, Make France Great Again. The French president interviewed the next night aboard the country's only aircraft carrier, insisted he doesn't respond to tweets.
The United States of America is our historic ally, and it will continue to be. It's the ally with whom we take all risks, with whom we conduct the most complicated operations. But to be an ally is not to be a vassal. We should not be dependent, and therefore, with regard to the Americans, we must spend more, we must do more ourselves, as French and as Europeans.
Agnès Paré, how do you think Emmanuel Macron handled Donald Trump over the last week?
Well, not badly. Perhaps, it's a testimony how well he dealt with him. There's 3 tweets,
How did ordinary citizens see it? When they see the tweets, what do they expect from their president?
Well, I think he's right. I mean, the French are not expecting the French president to reply to tweets. He would reply to a formal declaration from the White House or, something more official. If you start answering every single tweet of Donald Trump, that's all you do, and you don't achieve any work. So perhaps we have to just endure for the next 2 years, hopefully not the next 6 years, and wait that it goes away.
So hang on, you're saying that Macron is now in Trump's doghouse the way Angela Merkel is in Trump's doghouse?
Well, it changes all the time.
Christopher Dickey?
I think that politically for Macron, he's much better off in the doghouse than he is having Trump wipe things off his lapel. I think he really, really went overboard when he was in the States, trying to win over Trump and looking like the admiring good son with the admiring father. And it all was kind of weird-ass, sick-looking stuff, I think, to the French and to the Americans as well. And he got nothing out of it. I mean, his major priorities, the Iran deal, climate change, not sanctions, but tariffs, all of that completely failed. So,
but he had to try first.
Well, I'm not. No,
I think that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, that was what he was trying to do. He thought he could win over Trump, but he didn't.
No, but
so
you watched him talk about patriotism and nationalism in front of him. Trump's friend.
I believe the way he handled it now. What I'm saying is precisely that I think the strategy of trying to win over Trump is a dead strategy, and that he will not be well served if he were to continue to try to do that publicly. So he'd said what I think he absolutely honestly believed when he was speaking about the difference between nationalism, which is about hating other people, and patriotism, which is about loving your country. And he says that to Trump, and Trump, I don't even think, had his earpiece in. I don't think he could tell what was being said.
Was that the right way to go about it, that speech that was given on Armistice Day, on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, to be... We all knew he didn't say Trump by name, but he was lecturing the U.S. president.
Even the settings, with this Charles de Gaulle, which is supposed to be replaced, and it didn't look very natural in it. The journalist was quite aggressive.
Are you talking about the interview?
Yeah, so I think even from the very beginning, it wasn't very natural to respond. So I agree completely that he shouldn't have. But now he has a real problem for those 2 years. Trump, in effect, says Europe is a kind of enemy. They are invading us with very low, unfair trades.
And tariffs on wine.
Yes, they make pretty good wine, but California also. And what do? He's still a president of the United States. You can't make him away. And I think it's a real problem. And certainly with Germany in a state of change.
Yeah, but I mean, the other problem is that the right wing in Europe, the far right wing in Europe, is moving in on several fronts. And they're inspired and supported by Trump and by his people like Bannon.
Totally.
So either Macron is going to stand against that firmly and clearly and hope that the French people back him, or he's going to have to capitulate to Trump. And I don't think he's going to capitulate to Trump. I don't think there's any percentage in it for France to do that over the medium or the long term or even the short term.
But the Trumps of this world, in a way, do they always win in this kind of dispute? Because it always seems like the insurgents versus the establishment. Well, I mean,
in France, the Le Pen phenomenon is much older than in the U.S. This Trump phenomenon suddenly took up, and France has resisted, the National Front. Of course, it keeps growing in strength, and the system is so structured that, in fact, at the last moment, we don't see that actually entering into power into the National Assembly. The thing is, I absolutely agree with you that, Macron being tough and, seeming to lecture Trump should have been good for him. But it seems like very little seems to be domestically good for him.
That's another issue.
But that's another issue.
Is it another issue? That series of tweets coming at a time when, each day seems to be bringing news of another one of these races in the midterm elections going in favor of the Democrats.
Look, first of all, I think we have to step back for a minute and look at Trump's frame of mind when he was here. It's not just Macron's speech. It's the failure to keep the House of Representatives, which had just happened to him. But also, he never wanted to be here. On November 11th, he was supposed to have a big military parade, just like the July 14th parade that he had seen here in 2017. And this sounds ludicrous. This would be a joke, except that Trump himself thinks this way. And that's what he had wanted. And his consolation was to come here. And he thought that he was originally thought, when he announced he was coming here, he thought there would be a parade. He really thought there would be a parade. And people tried to tell him, no, there's not going to be a parade. It's going to be a solemn ceremony. And, you're going to be one of 60 or 70 world leaders who are there. It's not going to be a parade. And Donald, it's not going to be about you. And so he came in a very bad mood to begin with.
However, I mean, the thing that he took up, that Trump actually took up, the European military, well, just today, the Dutch Prime Minister said that actually we prefer to stick with NATO. So there is a point, because...
But Leila, what he took up was complete misreading of what Macron had said.
Yeah.
And he reiterated that in the tweet storm later. Yeah. Without ever, look, he has people in the U.S. Embassy, I don't want to get them into trouble, but they actually speak French. And they actually know what Macron said. And he actually doesn't give a damn about that. He seized on bad reporting about Macron's speech where Macron said, we have to defend ourselves from hackers, whether they're China, Russia, even the United States. Then later on, he says, France needs to take and Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense. There should be a strong European army that doesn't have to rely so much on the United States. That's exactly what Trump seems to be saying he wants, except now he's so mercenary that his line is essentially the Europeans should just pay the Americans.
All right, I want to get back to one of the tweets that Dove mentioned and do a little bit of fact-checking. Most have underlined that the tariff on California wine here is somewhere between 10 and 15 cents a bottle this 1 week. This is happening, though, the 1 week of the year where we can perhaps challenge the claim that France makes excellent wine. Yes, the third Thursday in November means the uncorking of Beaujolais Nouveau, the worldwide phenomenon traditionally bottled from the same year's harvest. Some question its raw fruit juicy taste, but do not tell the tourists, please.
It was a party wine before, but it's getting better, and it's less and less a party wine and more a traditional wine with a little more body than usual.
Very sweet. I like sweet things. This new wine that you guys have just made right now, loving the wine. Yeah, one of the best wines I've tasted.
There you have it, some connoisseurs, Agnès Poirier.
I think it's the exception that confirms the rule, Beaujolais, and the rest is wonderful. Now, I remember as a child, every year you had, it tastes like banana this year, or it tastes like, do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it's just a marketing thing, and the joy, if you happen to be abroad, like in London, for Beaujolais Nouveau, it's a very jolly evening, Forget about the wine.
Next morning's not so great.
Next morning's not so great indeed. Trump's tweets, by the way, the least of Macron's worry at this point. What started as a Facebook cry against rising prices at the pump is building up to Saturday's demonstrations across France by angry motorists wearing those yellow high-vis safety vests.
I thought that was a real boat.
Just the wrong clip there. The gilets jaunes, as they're called. They're wearing those yellow vests that you keep in the car in case
you're required to have them.
You're required now in France by law, and it's interesting, Dov Alphon, because. Emmanuel Macron getting it from both sides. On the one hand, we had this was the headline in the French broadsheet of record Le Monde earlier this week. Emmanuel Macron fears his electors will go towards the Greens, which right now don't account for much. Right. And on the other hand, these protests against the rising price of fuel. So
I'm a bit surprised from Macron's team, because the only French president that Macron loves to quote is Georges Pompidou. He quoted it only 4 months ago, and Pompidou said famously that les Français, ça aime la bagnole. The French love their French cars, and you can't really aggress them with taxes and these kind of things. And Macron is very sensible to these kind of things. I can't understand how this decision was taken without referring to the Élysée and to the huge influence it might have, and indeed it did, on his approvals rates. And I think he simply wasn't aware. It was under the radar. He didn't understand what was going on.
Well, it happened, in fairness to him, it really is a leaderless movement. It was started originally by 8 people who are all friends in a motoring club in the greater Paris area. And this groundswell has swept the country thanks to online petitions.
Our plan is to block malls where people shop and fill their fuel tanks. The money spent here is taxed, money that goes to the state. We want to block shopping centers to keep the state from getting that money.
Agnès Poirier, of course, we're sitting on the left bank of the Seine here, and the people around this table, they don't have to need their car necessarily as their means of transportation to get one point to the other. But is it down to that dichotomy between whether you're, on the one hand, you can afford to go to work, or whether you save the planet effectively because we're burning up too much fossil fuel?
Well, we're probably at a transition. I mean, in Paris, you know, our mayor has made it impossible to actually use a car, whether you want or not. So you have to use public transports or scooters or bicycles, or just your feet. But it looks to me from afar, from Britain, where I am based usually, that les gilets jaunes is morphing into something much bigger than just the rise of petrol prices, into something that is a bit, you know, what in France we call jacquerie or fronde, this rebellions that occasionally shakes French society. And there's something quite uncanny and a bit worrying about it when both extreme right and extreme left are kind of endorsing the movement, because what it shows is a lack of democratic opposition to Emmanuel Macron. You know, the left and the right are completely absent from the debate. So therefore, the only vocal opposition there is in France is the extremes. And it makes me think of Cinque Stelle in Italy, especially with the social networks, you know, just a petition between 8 friends. And here we are. Tomorrow, we're told that the country is going to be paralyzed. And there's something, you know, slightly worrying about it.
Lila Jacinto?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, the two big parties, you know, the Socialist Party seems to be caught on what to do. You know, Marine Le Pen seems to be supporting this, as is the extreme left Mélenchon. And the Socialist Party seems to have not a clue about what to do about these, because on the one hand it was the socialist government that introduced the carbon tax. So how can the socialist government be seen as anti-ecological? And I completely agree with you, Agnès. You know, you are seeing the lack of opposition, and this is just being co-opted.
If the opposition's not in parliament, it's going to be in the street.
Mm-hmm. As often in France.
Or both. The French love to go in the streets. And one of the things that's been very surprising to me is that with Macron ramming through all these regulations, all these laws that no other government has ever been able to get through without bringing the streets all down on them, there has been very little reaction. This is the first time, maybe, we haven't seen it yet, this is the first time we've seen that kind of outpouring of popular discontent that normally is actually
and just one final
regular feature of life.
piece of this is diesel cars. It all started with Dieselgate, but for years we had cheap diesel fuel, partially subsidized, and those people are working class people who have their diesel cars. Well, it's hard for them to make the shift to more expensive hybrids.
It is, and Dieselgate was a terrible thing. How do people get to work if they don't live within the radius of the public transport system? And the fact is, if they work in Paris, it's already impossible, thanks to Anne Hidalgo, the mayor.
Right, a bit of disgruntlement in the tone there from Christopher Dickey. I want to thank you, Chris. I want to thank Agnès Poirier. I want to thank as well Dove Alphon, Lila Jacinto. Encourage everyone to ride their bicycles. Coming up, we'll have more news. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.